A photograph sits in an archive, untouched for over a century. At first glance, it seems unremarkable. A black family dressed in their finest clothes, standing before a wooden house somewhere in rural Alabama. The year is 1905. The image is slightly faded, the edges worn by time. A father, a mother, 3 children. All of them looking directly at the camera with expressions of quiet dignity. But something in this photograph is not what it seems. Look closer. Look at the youngest child, a boy no more than 5 years old standing at the front of the family. Now look at his hand. He is holding something small, something metallic. For decades, no one noticed. The photograph passed through collections, was filed away, forgotten, until one researcher decided to zoom in. What she discovered would unravel a secret that the family had hidden in plain sight for over 100 years. A secret about chains, about freedom, and about the unbreakable bond between generations. This is the story of what that child's hand was holding, and why it changes everything. If you love stories that reveal the hidden truths of history, subscribe to this channel and hit the like button. You won't want to miss what comes next. The humidity inside the Alabama State Archives was oppressive, even with the aging air conditioning unit rattling in the corner. Dr. Ruth, a historian specializing in post-Reconstruction African-American communities, wiped the sweat from her brow and turned another page of the deteriorating catalog. She had spent 3 weeks buried in boxes of unclaimed photographs, images donated by estates, churches, and historical societies over the past century. Most were unlabeled. Many were damaged. All of them were waiting to have their stories told. It was tedious work. Photograph after photograph of unnamed faces, unknown places, fragments of lives that had slipped through the cracks of recorded history. And then she found it. The photograph was mounted on thick cardboard, the kind used by professional studios in the early 20th century. The image itself was remarkably well preserved. A family of 5 posed in front of a modest but well-kept wooden house. The father stood tall on the left, his hand resting on his wife's shoulder. She sat in a chair, her posture elegant despite the simplicity of her surroundings. Behind them, 2 older children, a teenage girl and a boy of perhaps 12, stood with their hands clasped in front of them. But it was the youngest child who caught Ruth's attention. A boy, small and serious-faced, stood at the front of the group. His clothes were clean and pressed, a tiny bow tie fastened at his collar. He looked directly at the camera with eyes that seemed far older than his years. Ruth leaned closer. There was something in his right hand. She reached for her magnifying glass and held it over the image. The object was small, dark, metallic. It could have been a toy. It could have been anything. But something about the way the child held it, deliberately, almost ceremonially, made Ruth's heart beat faster. She turned the photograph over. On the back, in faded pencil, someone had written a single line, "The Williams family, Hale County, Alabama, 1905. No first names, no context, just a family name and a place. Ruth stared at the photograph for a long moment. In her 20 years of archival work, she had learned to recognize when an image was more than it appeared, when a photograph was not just a record, but a message. This was one of those photographs. She carefully placed the image in a protective sleeve and made a note in her research journal. Williams family portrait, 1905. Child holding unidentified object. Requires further investigation. She had no idea that this single photograph would consume the next 2 years of her life, or that the answer to its mystery would reach back through generations of pain, resilience, and a secret past from parent to child in silence. The next morning, Ruth arrived at the university's imaging laboratory before anyone else. She had not slept well. The photograph had stayed with her through the night, the image of that child's hand refusing to leave her mind. Dr. Samuel, the lab's director and an expert in photographic restoration, met her with his usual skepticism. He had seen too many historians convinced they had found something extraordinary, only to discover that the mysterious object was a button or a piece of lint. "Let's see what you've got," he said, adjusting his glasses. Ruth handed him the photograph. He examined it briefly, shrugged, and placed it under the high-resolution scanner. The machine hummed to life. Within minutes, a digital image appeared on the monitor. Every grain, every shadow, every microscopic detail rendered in stunning clarity. Samuel zoomed in on the child's hand. The room went silent. The object was not a toy. It was not a coin or a button or a random piece of metal. It was a key, but not just any key. This was an old key, far older than the photograph itself. The design was crude, handmade with a thick shaft and heavy teeth. It was the kind of key that had not been manufactured for decades by the time this photograph was taken. "That's antebellum," Samuel whispered. "That key is from before the Civil War." Ruth felt a chill run down her spine. A key from the era of slavery, held in the hand of a child in 1905. The child would have been 2 generations removed from bondage. His grandparents, perhaps even his parents, would have been born into chains. Why would a family keep such an object? And why would they place it in a child's hand for a formal portrait? Ruth magnified the image further. The key was attached to a thin cord or ribbon, as if it had been worn around someone's neck. And there, barely visible on the shaft, were markings, letters or numbers too faded to read. "Can you enhance those markings?" Ruth asked. Samuel worked the software for several minutes. Slowly, the shapes became clearer. 2 letters emerged from the corrosion. JW. Initials. Someone's initials. Ruth's mind raced. The family name on the back of the photograph was Williams, JW. Could this be an ancestor, a grandfather, a great-grandfather? She looked at the child's face again. He was not simply holding the key. He was presenting it. His arm was extended slightly forward, the key visible and prominent. This was not an accident. This was intentional. The family had wanted this key to be seen. They had wanted it recorded. They had hidden a message in plain sight, waiting for someone, someday, to understand. And Ruth was determined to be that someone. Ruth began her investigation in the only place she could, Hale County, Alabama. The county had been at the heart of the Black Belt, named for its rich, dark soil that had made it prime cotton territory before the Civil War. It had also been home to some of the largest slave plantations in the state. By 1905, 40 years after emancipation, Hale County's black population had built churches, schools, and communities. But the shadow of the past remained. Many families still lived on the same land where their ancestors had been enslaved, now as sharecroppers or tenant farmers. Ruth drove through